Welcome to Evidence Based, a new Harbinger psychology podcast. I'm your host, Cassie Stossel. On today's episode, we're talking about healthy conflict. Our guest is Lisa Gray, author of Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple. Lisa is a licensed mental health professional with a private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she specializes in high conflict couples and chronic illness and pain. After working as an air traffic controller for 10 years and serving as a peer debriefing counselor for fellow controllers, Lisa decided to go back to school to study counseling. She graduated from John F. Kennedy University in 2004 with a master's degree in clinical psychology and has been working in the field ever since. Lisa is passionate about teaching couples to practice healthy conflict so that their relationships can thrive and grow. Lisa reviews self-help books on her Instagram, Therapy Book Nook, and she lives in the Bay Area with her family and 3 large dogs. Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I thought we could kick off. So you begin in your book with a statement that conflict is a skill. Can you say more about that and what it means?
Yeah, it is a skill. People are always telling me, I don't like conflict. I'm just not good at it. As if some people are born being great at conflict. And that's just not the case. Being good at conflict isn't a personality trait. It's not a temperament. It's not something that you're born with. It's something that we observe and practice, even if we don't know that we're doing that. And therefore, it is a skill that we can get better at. The problem is that we don't actually get any formal training at all about how to have relationship conflict, even though relationships are widely known to be the biggest part of satisfaction in life. But we get no training on relationship conflict. And then we have no structured way of practicing conflict. So we don't really have a way to develop the skill. And people usually fall into like 2 different circular patterns. So either something's bothering me that you've done, but we're having a great day. I don't want to ruin it. So I stuff it down. It's kind of like holding a beach ball underwater. And I keep stuffing things down, keep holding them down until one day something so big comes along that here it all comes out. And my partner's probably been doing the same. So then our conflict is so big, so unproductive, so painful that it just confirms what I already think, which is that conflict is bad and terrible and I shouldn't be doing it. So then the next time something comes up for me, I stuff it down again because that's what I've learned about conflict. And then on the other side of that coin, maybe something's bothering me that you've done or said, but we're having a great day. But I think, well, we'll have an even better day if I just bring it up, we work through it, whatever. So I bring it up when it's small like that. It might be a little bit of a painful conversation, but we work through it. We go off to have a great day, which confirms my hypothesis that working through conflict is good and we should do that at the lowest level. And so the next time something comes up for me, I'll do that. So we kind of tend to fall in one of these 2 camps, but not because we've been trained in this skill. It's usually because we've observed it done that way, or the first time we had conflict with someone, it worked out one of those 2 ways. And so we just keep doing the pattern. But unfortunately, we're not really trained in the skill.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm glad you say that because I think a lot of people just assume if their relationship has a lot of conflict, it's a bad one.
Oh, absolutely. You hear it all the time. You shouldn't be fighting. If your relationship's good, you shouldn't be fighting. And the truth is that in good relationships, people have conflicts all the time. They're just small, they're solvable, they get taken care of, and then they move on.
Yeah, and you mentioned that we fall into one of these 2 camps maybe because of what we've seen. Can you talk about why looking at your childhood is important in identifying your conflict style?
Absolutely. So again, because we get no formal training, when we grow up, our parents are really the only good, solid look we get at how to have a conflict. So when we were kids, we were in relationship 101 watching our parents. And if we have children now, our kids are in relationship 101. And so if you think about it, these are the same people that told you the sky is blue, 2 + 2 = 4, and this is how you do conflict, right? So whatever we observed is as entrenched in our brains as the fact that the sky is blue. And if we have no awareness about what we learned, then we have no foundational understanding of what our skill levels are and what needs to be worked on. So awareness is everything. First, being aware, of what we observed, what we might have learned, how we may be repeating that, or how we might just be trying to do the opposite but winging it because we don't know any other way to do it. So understanding your childhood model is kind of the first step of awareness in building this skill.
When you mentioned falling in these sort of two camps, what are some other common conflict styles and what might those look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of models out there of conflict styles. In the book, I use the Thomas Kilmann 5 style model because it's kind of, I feel like, one of the most self-explanatory ones. So, for example, you might be accommodating, which means you're always letting the other person get their way. You're never standing up for what you want or need in an argument. Or you might be an avoider, which many people are. So, as I already described, something comes up and you just do not want to go there. So, you don't talk about it at all. You can be compromising or collaborating, which obviously are two models where you're at least trying to work together with the other person for some kind of a good solution that works for both of you. And then there's the competing model, which is that it's kind of the opposite spectrum from accommodating, where I always stand up for what I want and it never matters what you want. It's always going to be my way. So, you can kind of look at those 5 models, think about your parents, think about, which ones they may have been and how those two models might have interacted with each other as you observed how to have a conflict.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, I hadn't, until I read your book, I hadn't thought about, everything does go back to like the house you grew up in, but I never thought about it where like my dad is not a yeller. Like, we just don't yell. And then when I see, friends' families who their conflict style with their families is to yell,
Yeah.
even if it's in a loving way. And I'm just like not used to that. So it's so interesting. And
Hmm.
it does make a lot of sense. What's modeled for you is how you,
Yeah.
go about your life.
Right.
Can you talk about what is a cognitive error and what are some that are probably affecting our attitudes toward conflict?
Yeah, so the phrase cognitive errors comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and there's quite a few cognitive errors. I'll go over just a few that really impact couples specifically when they are having a conflict. One of them is black and white thinking or all or nothing type thinking. So you can see that if I'm arguing, the toilet paper goes over. There's no other way the toilet paper can possibly go. And my partner is like, the toilet paper goes under. There's no other possible way the toilet paper can go. That there's really no conversation to be had there. We both just have this all or nothing thinking that there's only one way to do something. There's no other possible solutions. And if we have different solutions in that scenario, then we are just butting heads and we're never actually going to get anywhere. So introducing kind of some nuance, some gray scale in the black and white thinking can be very helpful for couples. Another one is mind reading. So this is a huge one, and I'm not sure what it's about, maybe fairy tales or something, but there is a real perception out there that if you love me, you will know what I need. You will know what I want. You'll know you shouldn't have said that. You'll be able to provide my needs without me saying anything. And this comes up in arguments because you know it's generally what sparks an argument because you've done something I don't like it, and the meaning that I attach to that is you must not love me or you must not care for me because you did this thing that you should know that you shouldn't do. And then also during the conversation I might do some mind reading in terms of like interpreting behavior. So you said that and that means, or you should know that this is what I mean as we're conducting the conflict. And so that can really get in your way. And then labeling. I mean, no one likes to be labeled with a big label. So if I say, you're so selfish, then we are going to argue because no one's selfish all the time and no one likes to be labeled with a huge label, but it happens in arguments quite a bit. So if I say something like, I thought you were so selfish when you took the last cookie, then you're going to be at least a little bit more receptive to what I'm saying than if I'm going to give you some big, huge label about who you are all the time in every situation. So that's one of the errors that gets in the way a lot as well.
Is it common for some of these errors to overlap?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're all doing them all the time. I mean, there's other ones catastrophizing, this means our relationship is over or whatever. And so, these overlap all the time, and we actually all do them, and we all do them quite a bit. But again, awareness is the first key, that if you at least know that that's not helpful, now you can try to avoid it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing that stood out in your book is you wrote that conflict increases intimacy exponentially. I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yes. This is really one of the most crucial pieces that I want people to walk away from, is that if you want to be intimate with another human being, you have got to figure out how to have healthy conflict. So if you think about it, if we take any two people on the planet, any two fully actualized adults, they are going to have different opinions. They're going to have different preferences. They're going to have different ways of doing things. There's absolutely no way around that. So if we are in a relationship and you do something that I don't like or I'm unhappy with, and I decide not to tell you that, then you go to bed tonight knowing me a little bit less than you knew me this morning. And that might not seem like a big deal, but if you multiply that by 10 years, 15 years, these are the couples that come into my office and say, "No, we've grown apart. We just have nothing in common anymore," because they neglected to share with each other, the things that were on their mind. So intimacy means truly knowing another person inside and out. And that is not just the good stuff. It's also all of the other things, sharing the things that don't work for you. So if you really, really want to be connected and intimate with another person, this is the main attitude shift you have to make. The main mindset shift that you have to make is that if I commit to being receptive to what this other person has to say, we can be closer. And you can see how that completely changes the conversation from the outset, right? So you come to me with something you're unhappy with, and instead of being annoyed or defensive, I'm like, please do tell. I really want to hear about this because I want to be close to you. It changes the whole entire process from the beginning.
Yeah, and that's a huge shift in mindset too, because, maybe the person usually is defensive about something, thinking it's their fault. But if it's an openness to get to know your partner a lot better, like that's such a better way to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, it's a simple shift, but it's also such a profound shift. And if we had gotten any sort of education on conflict, we would have known this from the beginning, right? But most of us, it just seems counterintuitive, but it's absolutely true that if you can make this mindset shift, it will get you halfway there for sure.
Yeah. And now that we're, starting to talk more about that conflict, what are some do's and don'ts for approaching conflict?
Well, one of the main ones is don't argue when you're drunk. Don't argue when you're using substances. So if you're going to have really productive, healthy conflict, you're going to need all of your wits about you. And so, particularly for avoiders, it's like if you use a substance or you drink, then your inhibitions go away, and here comes all of that stuff that you haven't been wanting to say before. So it's just a really bad idea. And it's unfortunately when most people argue because of that. That finally feel like I can loosen up enough to say the things that I've been feeling, but they don't have the brain bandwidth or the management of their physical body or all the things that they need to have an intentional, productive, healthy discussion and come up with some real creative solution. So that's the biggest one. Try not to need to be right. So you know couples come in, what they really want is for me to tell their partner that they're wrong, this
Mm.
thing that you've done is wrong. And the truth is, there's very few things that are right or wrong across every culture, across every time period. These things change because of the way we're brought up. We feel differently. So if you're going to just insist that you're absolutely right about something, it's just, first of all, you're probably not. And second of all, it's just not productive. It's not going to get you where you want to go. The other one is like arguing about where and when something happened. So, that happened on a Tuesday. No, it was Wednesday. You said this. No, I didn't say that. And it happens all the time. And I understand the compulsion to make sure that the other person really sees your point of view. But we all know this. If there's an accident, three witnesses, they're all going to tell the different story. They're not lying. They just remember it completely differently. And unfortunately, memory is faulty. And the way that it's encoded is affected by our high levels of emotion and all kinds of other factors. And so it's just kind of pointless to try to figure out exactly what happened when. You can completely argue about how something made you feel, whether it happened or not. This is how I felt walking away from that situation. But it's pointless to argue about, whether something happened exactly the way that you think it did. And staying on topic is super important. So, as therapists, we call this kitchen sink fighting, just throwing everything into the kitchen sink and fighting about it. But it's really hard to solve one problem. Like, I hate the way you load the dishwasher if we're also throwing in all of these other 100 things that I hate that you do. Then the way you load the dishwasher is never going to get solved. So if you can stick to one topic at a time, then it's going to be way easier to have productive conflict and actually come up with solutions.
So, Lisa, I wanted to ask, why is curiosity important in this work?
Curiosity is so important because, number one, it cuts through defensiveness. So you can see that if I come at you with, like, you are so selfish, at the example I gave before, or whatever, then it just inspires defensiveness in the other person. Whereas if I'm really curious about you, again, if I have a commitment towards intimacy, towards really getting to know you, then just even the tone of curiosity is so much different than the tone of accusation. And so if I can really adopt this whole attitude that I am so curious about what makes you tick, so I tell couples all the time, if you've been married 10 years or you've been together 10 years, your information about each other is probably like 9 years old, because you had all these great conversations when you were dating, talking for hours, all these things. And then you got married or lived together, you had kids, you have jobs, you have bills, there's chores to do, and you stop having those interesting conversations about one another. And so we're changing all the time. I mean, when I leave the house in the morning for work, I come back a different person, maybe not significantly, but if you add 9 years to that, and there's no curiosity about any changes that we've made, or, ways that we've changed our viewpoints, or whatever, then it's just going to be really hard to have a productive conflict, because you're going to be making a lot of assumptions that might be years old about the person that you're standing in front of. So curiosity is wonderful, wonderful tool.
Yeah, and it's like an opportunity to let your partner grow as well and to get to know the person who they become. Like, I read this quote, I forget where it came from, but it's like you're going to be married to multiple people throughout your
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's really profound. Like, I've been with my husband, we've been married 4 years together, almost 8. But like when we met, he was very like anti-sports, and now he's like obsessed with sports, like
Right.
suddenly.
Exactly.
And I'm like, who
Exactly.
are you? But like, tell me more about how
Right.
this came
Right.
about. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And people love when someone else is fascinated by them, and why do
Hmm.
we stop doing that when we get to know someone? We should always be fascinated with this person that, we're sharing our lives with.
Right, right. In your book, you talk about how the brain and body work during conflict. Can you specifically talk about the vagus nerve and its role?
Yeah. So first, let me give a disclaimer. I'm not a neuropsychologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. The brain and body are super complicated, so I tried to give just kind of an overview. But Stephen Porges came up with polyvagal theory. Deb Dana has written a lot of books, kind of for the lay person about the vagus nerve. So if you're more interested in it, there's a lot of information out there from people that this is like all they do. But the vagus nerve is one of the largest nerves in the body. And one of the things that it does is it kind of counteracts going into fight or flight. And so even if you are going into fight or flight, it can like regulate your descent into fight or flight. It can also help you find your way back from fight or flight if you've somehow dropped into fight or flight. So activating the vagus nerve and keeping that sort of healthy in your body is a very good way to keep yourself regulated. And some of the ways to do that, we've all heard of, like mindfulness, meditation, breathing, getting out in nature, those types of things. But there's also some super fun ones like loud singing. So now you have permission to sing loud in the shower all the time. And laughter. Laughter is a great one. Laughter activates the vagus nerve. And my favorite, you can fill a sink with really, really ice cold water and then just dump your face in it, and that will activate your vagus nerve. So I feel like committing to doing some of these practices on the regular kind of get you a regular sense of what it feels like to calm your body and brain. And if you have that regular experience of calming your body and brain, then you have more of a chance of being able to tap into that if you're in a conflict and you're starting to feel agitated.
That's really interesting. I wasn't aware of anything about the vagus nerve, but I unintentionally, whenever I'd get anxious, would activate because I had put an ice pack on my chest.
Exactly. Yep.
So it's just like
Yeah.
the bowl of water. Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point, is that everyone is going to find their own kind of favorite thing. And so that's why it's good to get, to really find out lots of different ways, because your way of activating it or calming yourself down might be totally different than someone else's.
I like the singing one though. Like there's not much
Yeah,
more soothing than like driving, listening to music you listened to in high school and just like screaming.
absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
One thing I wanted to ask too about is why can taking a timeout during conflict be beneficial?
Yeah. So if we think about the fight or flight response, right? You're having a conflict, you're dropping into fight or flight, or the primitive part of your brain. By definition, when that happens, you are cut off. You are out of touch with the creative problem solving part of your brain. So many couples want to keep arguing. Some people, I don't know if it's advice they got, don't go to bed angry or whatever, but they are like, we are going to solve this conflict right now. We're going to keep on going. We're going to push through. And the problem is that if you're in this primitive fight or flight brain, you aren't going to solve this conflict because you don't have your executive functioning online. You don't have any possibility of tapping into some kind of a creative problem solving solution. So timeouts are really essential. And actually most couples know that. Almost every couple you meet, they've heard the term timeout for couples fighting. They know that they should do it. I think the problem is they don't do it right. The person who wants to pursue the conversation, they might know that their partner is an avoider. So when their partner says, time out, let's stop talking about this now, the person who wants to pursue the conversation knows that if they let that person leave, they are never coming back. And so they're not going to let them leave. They're not going to take a timeout. Or people take a time out, and that's great, but they have no plan for coming back together. And what happens is it just kind of goes under the rug, doesn't really resume. And so timeout becomes avoidance. So the importance of timeout is to have a good timeout plan, right? The purpose of a timeout is simply to calm your physiology, to get back into that calm space. That shouldn't take 2 weeks,
Yeah.
And then once you've reached that calm space, you have an agreement to come right back where you're standing, right back where you're sitting, and start over and have this conversation again. So if you both know that that's going to happen, then you can let each other go. You can go sing in the shower or do whatever you need to do, and then come back to this spot, try it again. And you can see how that's very helpful, because now you're in the part of your brain you can actually have a good conversation.
I'm sure it's probably different for all couples, but is there like a recommended, obviously not 2 weeks, but is it best to do it the same day, like after you've calmed down or, days later? Is there a common rule you recommend there?
I usually say like 20 minutes to an hour
Okay.
is usually what it takes most people to actually calm down the physiology. But there's some people that could take longer, and that's not a problem as long as it's an agreement between the two people. There's also some people that are highly anxious when they've let their partner go to calm down, and so they might need a shorter period of time because they're so anxious about letting their partner walk off. So I think, yes, every couple is different, but as a general rule, I would say shoot for somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that way it's not too far spaced out where you can,
Right.
say, oh, I don't want to talk about that now. Like I'm still.
Right. Yes, of course.
Did you grow up with an emotionally immature, unavailable, or selfish parent? Join Lindsay C. Gibson, author of the self-help hit Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, for a 6-week intensive online course. You'll learn essential skills to reclaim your true self, build emotional resilience, and nurture healthy relationships. Sign up to learn more at newharbinger.com/Gibson-gift and receive a free excerpt bundle from Gibson's books. New Harbinger online courses, expert help for better mental health. Can you talk about the importance of intentionality in these conversations?
Yeah. So what happens with couples is that most of the time when they fight, it's because they're already mad. So, I'm not bringing something up until something happens. Now I'm mad. I'm already halfway to fight or flight in my brain when I start the conversation, So there's not that much hope in having a really super productive conflict. So intentionality is great because you can stay in touch with your goals. If I have some intentionality, if I have a process to work through, then we can say, okay, our goal for this conversation is this. We can stay in touch with that goal. I can remember that this is a person that I love. This is not my enemy. This is someone that I care about. We can stay in touch with that. We can care for each other during the conversation. We can really kind of back up and start over. We can do all kinds of things because we're intentional about the process that we're following instead of just, we're out somewhere winging it because we're super mad about something that probably we already know is a problem, but we just aren't willing to talk about until something happens.
Right. And in your book, you use a roadmap for conflict that is super clear, easy to understand. You have your setup, you have your conversation 1, and then conversation 2. Can you talk about why this can, be really impactful and why it's important to do something like a roadmap, like what you offer?
Yeah. Again, it's like when you're learning a skill, it's helpful to have something really structured in the beginning. 5 years from now, you get really, really good at this. You might not be sitting down with this exact structure, but you're following the structure in general, but you've mastered the skill sort of. But starting out, it's like setting up a conversation is important. No one likes to be ambushed. We don't want to be having these conversations when we're mad. And then one of the things that I find is couples try to move way too fast to solutions before they really understand each other. So conversation 1 is about really deeply understanding each other, why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, and then pause and then have another completely separate conversation about brainstorming and coming up with creative solutions to the problem. So for a process that is difficult for so many people, it's just helpful to have a real intentional, structured roadmap that they can follow while they're learning.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're offering training wheels to like get through your conflict.
Exactly. Right.
In your practice and, in what you've seen over your years as an expert, what are some of those common conflicts that arise for couples?
Yeah, we all know that couples fight about money. They fight about finances, budgeting, all those things. They fight about household chores, division of labor, roles. They fight about parenting. It's not very often I see people with the exact same kind of parenting philosophy or methods. And then there's in-laws. How should we interact with in-laws? How long should they stay? What should they be allowed to do? Whatever. Sex, also a topic that people are rarely exactly the same on, and one that's very difficult to talk about for most people. So yes, there's kind of buckets of common themes that people talk about. But again, for most people, the problem is not the content. The problem is not the topic of their fight. The problem is how they're talking about it, how they're fighting about it, the way that they're kind of approaching that topic. So it's not so much that these topics are unsolvable, it's just that people aren't approaching them with a systematic approach for solving them.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. What happens when, a lot of these problems and conflicts you mentioned likely come up over and over again? Can you talk about what to do when that happens, especially if you've worked through the roadmap and you've had this really intentional conflict. What do you do? How do you troubleshoot that?
Yeah, I feel like if you are working through this roadmap and you are truly following it, if you're really staying calm, if you're really brainstorming multiple solutions, the same conflict shouldn't come up over and over again. When conflicts come up over and over again, people start to feel like they're incompatible. They start feeling like they've got just some kind of an irreconcilable difference. And maybe they do. I mean, if someone wants to have a baby and the other person doesn't, maybe they do have an irreconcilable difference, right? But there's actually very few of those. And so I would say if you're really doing the roadmap, or you think you are, and the same conflict keeps coming up over and over, it's probably time to get a therapist who can walk you through it and see where, it's not working for you, because something's going wrong there, and for whatever reason you're not able to make that adjustment.
Yeah, and to get outside help is probably best. So what you're offering in this roadmap, it's really important that it's intentional, you make space and time for it. But what happens if a fight comes up and you just feel like it really can't wait?
Yeah. Okay. I will answer your question, I promise. But first, let me say that I think this is extremely rare. So it feels like people are always having fights that just can't wait. But the truth is, they already know that they have a problem with that thing before that emergency situation came up, right? So one of the examples I give in the book is, let's say you go to a little league meeting with your child, and while you're there, they say this has to be signed up for today. Today's the last day, right? So that seems like an emergency situation. You want to sign your child up, your partner doesn't want to spend the money or doesn't want to spend the time or whatever. It has to be decided right now. Seems like an emergency. And it is maybe in that moment. But the problem is, you already knew you had this difference before you ever went to the little league thing, right? I mean, most people, if a random couple comes in my office and I say, what are the topics that you fight about? What are the themes that you fight about? They know, they can tell me. They already know they have disagreements over how many sports their kids should do or how much they should spend on sports. So if they were following my model, they'd be already having those conversations before something comes up. They'd be figuring out solutions to that. And then they would find that very few true emergency situations actually do come up. But let's say that it does. Let's say something comes up that, I mean, you just never saw coming, not something you've ever thought about before, you had no idea.
Total
If
shock.
you, yeah, complete shocker. If you've been following the roadmap and you're getting good at it, then what I would say is try to do an abbreviated version of the roadmap. So very quickly, try to understand where each person is coming from, try to look at the possible solutions, and then I would say make the least impactful decision that you can make in that moment, like the one that creates the least damage or whatever. Then circle back around and follow up later with the full roadmap. So now that you know you have this difference, now circle back around and have the complete conversation, which should give you more of an array of creative options and a true understanding of where you're both coming from. And then you won't run into that particular emergency situation again.
We've talked a lot about the conflict in relationships and stuff, but it does feel like the basis of this is to have like a really good foundation. So what are some ways that you recommend couples can amplify like the good things in their relationship?
Yes, very important. I look at relationships kind of like a bank account, right? So if you're having conflicts, those are withdrawals, and you can't make withdrawals if there's nothing in the bank. So while it might seem weird that I'm talking about amplifying the good in a book about conflict, it's sort of like you do actually need money in the bank if you're going to have really good conflicts. So if couples come to me and their conflicts are just long and deep and painful, sometimes we do just work on amplifying the good at the beginning because we need something to draw from. So the first thing is just better communication and conversation. Again, your information about each other is probably really old. So going back to having some of those non logistical conversations can really be helpful. So, I mean, I have a book about, 4,000 questions for getting to know people, or whatever, things like that. It's like, my couples can start having these dreaming conversations again. Who are you? That's going to really increase your friendship and your commitment to each other, which is a great way to amplify the good. Another thing is shared interests. So I personally don't think that it's absolutely necessary to have a ton of shared interests to be compatible, but there's no question that doing something fun together is going to increase your connection. So if you've fallen away from doing fun things together, when you dated, you went walking on the beach at sunset, you went slow dancing, you went bowling, you did all these things, and now you're on the couch in your sweats watching Netflix, you might want to put some consideration into developing a commitment and a list to do some fun things together. And if you've completely lost contact with that, then great. Start brainstorming, start looking around for things that other people are doing. Find some festivals, find some hiking trails, whatever it is. But doing things together is going to amplify the good in your relationship for sure. And then that speaks to time. So time together, if you do have children and if you do work, it's like your kids are advocating for their needs 24/7, and so's your boss probably. So your couple time just kind of takes a back seat. Like we can go behind all of these other things, and pretty soon you're just not investing any time together, and life is busy for all of us. So I suggest certain parameters. Like, I don't think 20 minutes a day is too long to ask couples to spend together talking, snuggling, whatever it is. I think pretty much the busiest person could give me 20 minutes a day. And then everyone kind of knows about the weekly date. Lots of people don't do it, even though they know they should be doing it. I think it's because they're trying too hard. You don't need to go into the city and see a play and all these things. Just go to sit at Starbucks for 2 hours and talk, but just give me 2 hours a week of away from the house by yourselves for some kind of a date connection. And particularly if you have children, but even if you don't, really, quarterly, go somewhere overnight, have an overnight, wake up somewhere else. It's kind of a magical thing that we do a lot when we're dating, and we don't do very often when we're done dating. So spending time together, and then laughter is like gold money in the bank. So the more you can laugh together, the more bonded you're going to feel. So laughing together can totally amplify the good in your relationship. Take advantage of it. It's free.
Exactly. I wonder what your thoughts are too. A lot of couples have found themselves, like my husband and I work from home together now. Like we are
Yeah.
literally just never apart.
Right, exactly.
So, one thing I think we need to work on is separating like when we're just around each other versus actually engaging with each other.
Exactly.
Do
Yes.
you have any like tips for that?
Well, I think it goes back to intentionality, so it's like, I used to see this a lot with couples who like owned a business together, but now we're seeing it way more just because we are working together at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to kind of create some sort of rituals for marking like the end of the workday and the beginning of the couple evening. Or, this is the shift that we make when we're done just being colleagues and turning into partners. But it can be helpful to create some sort of markers that you can see intentionally mark that shift between just kind of passing each other in the hall and then actually spending time together intentionally as a couple.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you're talking about these shared activities and, intentional dates and communication, why is it important to check in with your partner after those and what might that look like?
Yeah, so it goes back to curiosity and being committed to this sense of intimacy with each other. And so if we're trying something new and seeing if that can be a bonding experience for us, like every other thing that we're talking about, it's important then afterwards to be really curious, because you want to know this person, you want to know their thoughts and feelings about things. And so it's just kind of a curiosity conversation. It can be folded into these daily conversations that you have, or be something different. But it's just, really kind of wanting to know, what was your experience? Did that make us feel closer? Did we not like that? If we didn't, what else could we do that might be similar, that we would like better? I just want to see a lot more curiosity and openness and this commitment to know each other. So that is true when you're having conflict, but it's also true with the good things.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, as we start to wrap up, what advice do you have for couples just beginning to learn that, this idea of healthy conflict and how to engage with it?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, remember that old patterns die hard. Remember that whatever model you have or whatever it is that you have been doing, it's likely been encoded in your brain from childhood. You might have many years of doing the same pattern. So when couples come to see me, I'll suggest something and they'll often say, well, we tried that, and I'll say, well, did you try it with me? Because, we're going to do something different now. It's easy to sort of dismiss this can never change. This can never get better. We've been doing it this way so long, it's just impossible. So just remember that when you're learning something new, and especially if you're unlearning something old as you're learning something new, that's a process. It's not a perfect, it's going to go up and down. You're going to fall down. You're going to skin your knees. It's not going to go perfectly because learning a new skill is hard. So having a lot of compassion for yourself and for each other, and not looking at it as a failure when things go wrong. It's just, okay, that didn't work. Let's tweak that a little bit. Let's change that part of it a little bit. But that's how learning processes work. So just try to remember that you're unlearning, you're learning. This is hard. And so be good to each other while you're trying to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to wrap up unless you have any final thoughts for the listeners.
Well, I just want to say again that like no book can cover every nuance, and it's like if you read a parenting book, you might think, well, that's all well and good, but that doesn't work for my kid, And so there's no possible way that a book can kind of be perfect for every couple everywhere. So I just want to reiterate that this is the basic model, but if you need more help, you can bring this model to a professional, to a therapist, and they can help you perfect it. They can help you learn. Just like many times when you're learning something, um, you have an instructor that's teaching you. So, we go to the dentist every 6 months and our relationship is way more dynamic than our teeth. So if we had someone to check in with on a regular basis, that would be very helpful. And so I would just say, don't hesitate to find help if for whatever reason you're having a hard time learning this skill. And I just invite you to look at it as an adventure. You're trying to increase intimacy with this person that you love being with, and it can be a great adventure. So try to look at it as something fun that you're embarking on learning.
That's all such great advice. And there's nothing wrong with getting help and, tuck in for the adventure. And thank you so much, Lisa, for this conversation, for your work, for your book. I know I got a lot out of it. I'm sure everyone else will as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Stop fighting with each other and start fighting for your relationship. This unique guide uncovers the science of conflict to help you let go of blame and reignite intimacy and joy. Are you constantly arguing with your partner about every little thing? Do you feel like you are on completely different pages when it comes to finances, future plans, or parenting? Most couples fight from time to time, but if fighting is starting to wear on your relationship, you may need a new method for conflict resolution. This empowering guide can help you find the peace, happiness, and intimacy you seek, all while growing stronger together as a couple. In Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple, relationship expert Lisa Gray breaks down the neuroscience of conflict, examines family of origin learnings, beliefs, attitudes, or habits we learn in childhood from our own parents, and provides practical methods which can be employed in any situation to help you put an end to unproductive arguments. You'll also find evidence-based communication, mindfulness, and cognitive skills to help you stay calm, work through disagreements, and come to a peaceful resolution, even when your emotions are running high. With this step-by-step guide, you'll learn the science of why you fight, mindfulness skills to manage conflict in the moment, how to build awareness of your own fight or flight responses, breathing techniques to soothe anger, and creative problem-solving skills to encourage cooperation and harmony. Visit our website at www.newharbinger.com and use coupon code podcast25 to receive 25% off your entire order. New Harbinger Publications is an independent, employee-owned publisher of books on psychology, health, spirituality, and personal growth. For 50 years, our evidence-based self-help books and pioneering workbooks have helped readers make positive changes to improve mental health and well-being. Founded by psychologists Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning, New Harbinger is proud to be an employee-owned company. Our books reflect our core values of integrity, sustainability, compassion, and trust. Written by leaders in the field and recommended by therapists worldwide, New Harbinger books are practical, accessible, and provide real tools for real change. Earning your continuing education hours doesn't have to be a painful experience. The right course can open your mind to new possibilities, increase your confidence, and hand you powerful tools to transform your clients' lives. Praxis Continuing Education and Training teams up with some of the brightest minds in mental health to provide cutting-edge, evidence-based training for practitioners. You can learn firsthand from experts like Stephen C. Hayes, Kelly Wilson, Robin Walzer, Kirk Strazel, and many others. Find your next training at praxiscet.com. That's praxiscet.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the show, and we hope you might share it with anyone who might benefit from the content. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling with a licensed provider.